So please take a seat. We will have our first session today on the MENA region in a changing global order. مرحبا شكرا على الضيوف thank you very much for having me this year. For your luck, not as a speaker, but as a moderator. And I'm particularly pleased to welcome a very excellent lineup of speakers to discuss the changing dynamics in the MENA region. We know that over the past year, you have seen in this region like unprecedented change, but over the past 2 years and a half in particular, the region has really undertaken incredible changes. We see that there are different regional projects that are competing against each other. Israel has its own way of looking at the region, Iran, a competing way of looking at the region, Turkey and the Gulf. And in all that, we have a very difficult multilateral system that is increasingly in crisis, with global actors such as the United States at a crucial time of their history in defining their role in the MENA region. So let me start by for addressing this important question by giving the floor to Victoria Taylor, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Iraq and Iran, Department of State. And I would like to actually start quite concrete with you, Victoria, if I may, and ask you to give us a bit of an update on where we are. We know that the U.S. administration, the Trump administration, has intention to restart, to give a chance to diplomacy, to restart negotiation on the nuclear deal with Iran. So if you could give us an update on what is happening and at what point we are on U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiation, especially after the meeting in Oman.
Sure. Well, thank you, Maria. So I think we're in the very early stages. Of course, President Trump has made very clear still that the U.S. objective is to ensure that Iran has no nuclear weapon and no enrichment program. But he's also been quite clear and quite open that his interest is in resolving U.S. differences with Iran through dialogue and diplomacy. So, of course, we have had one opportunity to discuss these issues with the Iranians in Muscat over the past week. And I think this is a very positive first step. But, of course, there's a long way to go. And we know that over the course of many decades, the ability to achieve a lasting deal with Iran over the nuclear program has eluded us. But I think this first round was positive, it was constructive, and there's agreement that there will be talks in the coming days, though I have no more information about when and where. But I think over the coming talks, we expect to develop more of a framework about how we will proceed in terms of those negotiations.
Let me a little bit push you on that and ask you that one question about the framework, because President Trump has always said that he wants to deliver a better deal than the JCPOA. What type of options are for a better deal at this point?
Sure. So I think we're still in early stages and have not defined what the parameters of those negotiations will look like. And so I think the coming round of discussions will help us charts this path forward. But I think it's also important to remember that in addition to the concerns the United States has about Iran's nuclear program, we also continue to have deep concerns about Iran's destabilizing activities throughout the region, including its support for terrorism through its proxies, including the lethal plotting against dissidents overseas and former U.S. officials. And so those remain ongoing concerns. I think it's also important to note that maximum pressure is still in effect. Even as we are pursuing negotiations with Iran over the nuclear program, the president has directed the United States to seek all opportunities to deny Iran access to the revenue that it uses to really fund those nuclear activities and its support for terrorism. So the best way for Iran to get that economic relief and seek the removal of those sanctions is for it to stop the activities that caused us to put those sanctions into place.
Could a way, because maximum pressure, obviously, it has been at play, but it has also backfired at some points. I mean, it could also, in some settings, one is Iraq, strengthen certain group vis-a-vis of the government. So I wanted to just ask you maybe a question about whether there is perhaps space for a little bit less of maximum pressure and a little bit more of diplomacy, especially when it comes to a nuclear deal that could also include some of the regional actors which were first excluded from the negotiation, and specifically the Gulf states.
Well, I think that really depends upon the parameters for the negotiations, but also I think it's going to depend upon the steps that Iran takes as we pursue those discussions. And of course, Iran's continued support to proxies, militias, that's a concern of not only to the United States, but we know for countries throughout the region. And again, I think the quickest way for Iran to get that economic relief is to halt those activities that cause us to put those sanctions into place.
Thank you. Let me move now to Krikor de Hagopian, who is the Director of International Relations at the Prime Minister Office. And actually, I would like to ask you about an issue that relates to what Prime Minister Soudani has mentioned during his speech, because he spoke about a state of institution, Dawlat al-Muassasat. He spoke about also a new national pathway for Iraq foreign policy. So you have been working with the Prime Minister at the very difficult time, where Iraq is navigating this shifting geopolitical environment, at the moment also where Israel has started aggressive operation across the region. Can you tell me, how have you navigate these difficult times as Iraq government, especially, for example, when some groups that are outside Iraq government control have actually taken initiatives, offensive initiatives against Israel and really threatened Iraq autonomous foreign policy. So can you give me just a quick line on how you navigate this difficult environment?
First and foremost, for Iraq to be able to project influence and to have a sound foreign policy, it needs to get its act together internally. And one of the ways to do that, and one of the essential elements of statehood, is the monopoly over the means of violence. And this was one of the elements of the government formation program, where the political parties that won the elections sat together, discussed the government program, entrusted the chief executive, the commander-in-chief, in order to progressively, condition-based DDR process in order to maintain this monopoly over the means of violence. And since the first day, the government has worked in conjunction with the political parties, with the support of the Iraqi population. And to be honest, the ultimate religious authority has played a central role to this end in order to strengthen the government's hand in achieving monopoly over the means of violence. This is why since the formation of the government and up until October 7th, Iraq witnessed an unprecedented era of security and stability. What happened on October 7th was a shock, a systemic shock, that threatened Iraq and the entire region, something that was not of our own doing, but we were going to be impacted by it. Therefore, as a result, the Prime Minister, in conjunction and in close cooperation with his coalition partners, first of all, addressed this issue politically. And as far as I can see, this was one of the most important steps both sides, those who were in favor of and those who were against dragging Iraq into this conflict militarily, they were very clear, the government and the Prime Minister and his supporters, that Iraq will always live up to its moral responsibility.
When you say those one who were in favor, you mean specifically?
Members of the coalition that were against dragging Iraq into this conflict militarily, while living up to Iraq's responsibilities towards the Palestinian people and to their grievances in terms of moral responsibility, humanitarian responsibility, legal responsibility, and Iraq played a role. So all of these things, Iraq lived up to its responsibilities short of dragging Iraq into a military conflict. And we have to understand Iraq's history in order to see where and why this decision was taken.
Sure.
Iraq was a pioneering country in the region. Many countries, many people in the region looked up to Iraq as a model. But as a result of blunders, wars, military coups, the situation was reversed. Many Iraqis started to look at these countries as a model. And this has created some sort of a bitterness. The second issue, the Iraqi people are very young. About 30% of the Iraqi population are under the age of 14. I think 60% are under the age of 64. These people need job opportunities, want a decent life, and in order to do that, we need peace, security, and stability in order to be able to deliver to these people. These were the essential elements that drove the government's and the governing coalition's calculations in trying to insulate Iraq from the military conflict. Eventually, the Iraqi government was able to prevail, and peace and security was restated.
Can I ask you quickly, if at some point when I was looking at how quickly things changed, for example, in Syria after December 8th, and how also in just a few months we have seen unprecedented transformation across the region, and there was also fear that after we have seen Israel actions in Lebanon and then also across the region, that Iraq will be next. Do you think that how, for example, if such an offensive action would be undertaken, what type of consequences there will be?
First of all, it's uncalled for. First of all, this would be uncalled for. Given the relative security and stability that Iraq is undergoing, there is no threat that is emanating from Iraq militarily. This would be a blatant aggression against Iraq. And I would hope...
Against the government.
Against the government and against the Iraqi people, against Iraq. What would be the reason for an attack against Iraq, the Iraqi people, and against the infrastructure in Iraq?
You have to be closer to the mic, otherwise...
I think I'm as close as I can get. I'll try to get closer. So that would be a blatant aggression and a violation of international law. We do not expect it, and we do not accept it. If it happens, it will have a very destabilizing effect on Iraq. There is significant progress in Iraq, but it's always fragile and reversible. And I think it would backfire on the entire region and on the aggressor too. I hope, and to the credit, giving credit to the United States of America also, they have played an important role in averting such a catastrophic scenario. I hope that we won't. To insulate Iraq from such a military conflict, such an aggression would not be acceptable.
Last point maybe that I want to ask you is precisely about the US role. I mean, US-Iraq relations have a troubled history, but also I would say a history of gradual understanding on how they can cooperate. And I wanted to ask you about especially after the changes that happened in the region, whether there is any idea of rethinking the plan for drawdown US presence, or if you are still set on a schedule that's set for September 2025, an initial drawdown. And connected to that, just about how important is actually to keep US-led coalition presence both in Iraq and in Syria for the stability of the country and against a potential resurgence of ISIS?
The relationship with the United States of America is one of the most important foreign relations that Iraq has. The United States of America was responsible for the change, for getting rid of the dictatorship, and for putting Iraq on a path to become a model in the Middle East, a pluralistic democracy where people from different ethnic, sectarian, and political backgrounds that can come together and share power. Of course, you said trouble. If you study transitions by definition are very thorny processes.
Right.
They take a very long time. It's very difficult. If you read American history, after a century, they had a civil war. I think Iraq is shortcutting through that. Therefore, I think this relationship is kind of an anchor if the Americans want to constructively engage with Iraq and keep supporting Iraq to continue down its path and complete its transition. As for the global coalition to fight ISIS, I think it's an important element. There has been an announcement, an agreed upon announcement between the two countries that had 3 conditions. The first condition is the capabilities of the Iraqi security forces. The second is the level of threat from ISIS. The third is the environmental threat. And I think 2 of the 3 conditions we can see a significant change in. ISIS has been able to control some weapons in Syria, and the level of the threat has gone up. And the changes in Syria have given them a launching pad, a foothold that needs to be taken into consideration. Now, it's a global coalition, which the United States of America is an important element of it, if not the pillar of it. Therefore, we're still waiting for our counterparts in the global coalition to formulate their policy vis-à-vis the global coalition so that we can chart our way forward. So far, there has been no discussion about changes in timelines. Maybe platforms, yes, given the change of the threat. First, previously, the level of the threat was northeast Syria. Now it has shifted south from the Iraqi-Syrian borders to Deir ez-Zor to Palmyra to south of Damascus. This might be reconsidering the platforms where these counter-ISIS operations need to take place, but we're still waiting for the Americans to formulate their policy so that we can chart our way ahead. And mill-to-mill relations and discussions are ongoing, but this is ultimately a political decision.
Definitely. Thank you,
You're
Grigor. Thank you. And let me go actually, because you mentioned the issue of the coalition, and many European countries are actually part of this coalition as well. So I would like to hand over the floor to Ann Linde, who is the former foreign. And maybe ask you also about, we are also at the critical time, not only in the Middle East, but we are at a critical time in the transatlantic relations between the United States and Europe. And how do you see this unfolding, and how do you see EU-US relations continuing, especially when it comes to the approach towards the MENA region? One thing that comes in my mind is, for example, the EU role in what we just discussed, which is the US nuclear negotiation. The E3 are still like part of the JCPOA, they are part of the JCPOA, so this is one important element. How do you see Europe-Iran relations also unfolding?
Well, thank you very much, Maria, and thank you very much for inviting me again to this really, really wonderful forum. Yes, I mean, I'm a policymaker from the EU, and actually the European has long viewed the transatlantic relation as the cornerstone when it comes to the alliances, and especially, of course, for foreign and security policy, but also for economic ties and so on and so forth. And today, this foundation is actually shifting. We are witnessing a kind of, you can say, erosion of traditional alliances. And that means that we have to accept that US is, in fact, stepping back from its long-standing leadership role, not only when it comes to relation EU-United States, but its leadership role globally. And we have this every day there are new decisions coming from the Trump administration that is actually taking them back from a leadership role in the world. And I think this has not only big implications for EU, but also for this region in MENA. And I think there needs to be a rebalancing on, and maybe even a recalibration of whom are we going to cooperate with? What are we going to cooperate about? And also the question of, like for Iraq, who has, as for the Prime Minister's office said, this strong relation with West and United States. Now new players come in. Turkey, China, Saudi Arabia, in a stronger way when US is going back. And I would say also that from EU, we need to see MENA, Middle East and North Africa, in another light. I mean, we can no longer see it just as a buffer zone or a source for issues like migration and energy, but also to form a strategic partnership between EU and MENA that we actually have not had before. It comes like building resilience, sustainability, also green transition, which is so very important, and accepting that MENA in its own is an agency that is shaping also the global order.
On this, I mean, you didn't answer my question about the E3, but if you want, obviously, I mean, you can. If you don't want, I have an additional question that to ask you. When you say about the partnership, do you see EU-Gulf relationship being, for example, one of the drivers of this new light that you were mentioning? And also, when you were mentioning about, like in some way, having a different type of relationship with certain countries that undergo transition, what do you see the EU role in Syria specifically?
Well, to start with, I think I said that there is a weakened transatlantic link, for sure. That was kind of the beginning of the whole thing, that we have said it's a cornerstone and it's not that anymore. And you could see right now that the trade commissioner went home from Washington more or less empty-handed. And I think it will be very difficult to understand how deep the implications are of those tariffs. You say tariff is, what does that matter? Well, Sweden is a country of 10 million people. We are the 10th biggest investor in the United States. And that means that if we suddenly get, as there is even in this pause, 25% tariffs on steel, aluminium, cars, and 10% on everything else. So this pause is not making a big shift. And what we now have to do is to expand the partnership with other areas in the world. And I think it's interesting, for the first time ever, the European Union 2 days ago, or maybe 3 days ago, had a high-level dialogue with the Palestinian Authority. Never happened before. Has only had that with Israel, not with Palestine. Now it was the first time. And enhancing the budget for supporting infrastructure and good governments in Palestine. Big shift.
Thank you, Anne. And I was mentioning before also the EU-GCC partnership. Let me give the floor also to Badr Al-Saif, who is assistant professor at Kuwait University and associate fellow at Chatham House. It seems that in all this big chaos that we are undergoing, sometimes we feel that the Gulf countries are actually the ones who got it, that they had a vision on how to navigate this multipolar order at the global level and multi-alignment as well at the regional level. Is it right? Is it not? Correct me or challenge this.
بسم الله أصحاب السيادة السعادة المعالي الحضور الكرام السلام عليكم سعيد بوجودي واحترام كبيرين لأبناء السليمانية الإقليم والعراق قاطبة بناء على طلب الميسر سأنتقل إذا تسمحوا لي للغة الإنجليزية. Absolutely. I mean, you're right on. I think in the Gulf right now, there is that sense of vindication that we got it right all along. And there is that sense that's been brewing all along that the Gulf has been increasingly viewing itself as a center of its own. And there is no telling moment than that centrality being played out when you're looking at how the world is moving through. And if I may push back, and I'm referring to the synopsis of the panel, in terms of us entering a multipolar world, I think that's not how many in the Gulf view the world. And I think that's probably part of the success story so far in the Gulf. I mean, there are setbacks, of course, nothing is perfect, but they're trying to move in a certain trajectory. And the argument that I have in here is that we're living through a fragmented world order. And such fragmentation requires a sense of fluidity and agility in moving our way around. And in that fragmentation, you really see different world orders competing with one another. So you cannot say that we're moving very swiftly from an American unipolar moment to a multipolar moment. There is a lot of mixes between the two. Take, for example, the unipolar moment, which I think is very present right now. I mean, America is not going anywhere. I'm looking at it from the Gulf perspective. Look at the security alliances that we have. Look at the 3 biggest US files when it comes to negotiation and mediation. They're happening in the Gulf, whether it's Gaza, on Palestine and Israel and Qatar, whether it's the Russia-US talks with the Ukrainians in Riyadh, or lately the US-Iran talks in Muscat. So there is some credence to having that moment moving through as we go through. Now, there is also a sense, and I think Her Excellency hinted towards that there is an imperial order that could be beyond us. I mean, Russia-Ukraine was one example, but now we have the US flagging, certain countries as part of their larger interests, whether it's the Greenland, Panama, or Canada. Yes, it could be a bluff, but I think, once you put that out there, there's a lot of things that you need to keep in mind.
Badr, I was wondering about, when you said that basically it's a bit of the old war that is still existing of the US unipolarity, and it's a bit of a new war that it's taking place at the same time. When it comes to the Gulf, we all wonder how much still the US security guarantees matter for Gulf states. So I have a question on this, and also maybe quickly about what we discussed early on about the potential role of Gulf states in a new nuclear deal. How do you see this?
Let me tell you how we view ourselves within this changing global order. I think the best way to sum it up is that we see the world in an apolar lens, in that there shouldn't be, thinking of polarity is going back to the past. And it's a tried, lazy, unit of analysis. We need to move beyond it. And when you think beyond that, you're really leaping into the future and into the ways that we can connect with one another beyond the nation state. Let's decenter the nation state. There are networks that are happening, connectivity agendas, development roads, minilaterals. I think these are the ways that we can move forward. US security understandings, yes, they're there, and I think we're also working towards updating them. I think there has been some sense between, and this is across administrations, whether in the Republican or the Democratic administrations, there was that perception that there was a receding from the US interest. But I think both parties now get it, that there is a reorientation with more agency, with more understanding that the Gulf states are taking matters in their own hands. Look, in terms of the Iran-US talks, I think many in the Gulf, if not all countries, have come out, with supporting statements. This is where we want to go. But again, it shouldn't be a very focused lens on the nuclear issues. I think, there are 3 buckets, and if we look at them collectively, it's to the interests of not only Iran and the US, but everyone else involved. And it's also about the missile activity and the proxy network. Now, some say that in 24, Iran moved into its weakest. Some would argue that the proxies are not where they used to be, but I would beg to differ.
But would you have the missile as a part of the deal, in your opinion, from a Gulf perspective?
I think a comprehensive deal is in the best interests of all parties involved. We want a normalized region where everyone thrives together.
Thank you. And let me also leave the floor to Renad Mansour, who is the director of Iraq Initiative at Chatham House, who has been like a long time Iraq observer and academic. And I would challenge you with one question. If you will be tomorrow the advisor of Prime Minister Soudani, and even for the next year, since he has announced that he will rerun for election, what would you suggest him for as a foreign policy plan for the next 5 years?
Thank you, Maria, and thank you to AUIS, to Dr. Barham, Mac, and Iris for the kind invitation. Before I answer this difficult question, especially because there is a current advisor to Prime Minister Soudani here, I think I want to pick up on Badr's point, which I think is really important. There are two dynamics happening globally right now. One, if you look at the data of conflicts, in the last 10 years, conflicts globally have doubled. So there are 2 times as much conflicts in the world in 2025 than there was in 2015. So that's one dynamic. The second dynamic is you have this fragmentation of the international order, and you have not quite unipolar, not quite multipolar, but what I think we're defining as multi-alignment. So middle powers in the region can choose issue by issue how to approach. There are no poles. It's not us versus them, East versus West, communist versus democracy.
So you mean it's issue-based?
It's issue-based. So how do we bring these two dynamics together to make sense? Is it that multi-alignment is actually a reason for the doubling of conflicts? The Middle East is where the changing world order is playing out violently. It's the front line of changing global dynamics. And that's why we're seeing the violence that we're seeing there. There are no rigid spheres of influence. And I 100% agree with Badr. The West, the US and Europe still have a Cold War mentality to understanding conflict. What's happening in the region by middle powers, whether it's in the Gulf, Turkey, or Iraq, to some extent, as it develops, is a realization that no, we can be a country that has, based on different issues, different policies. Look at the country of Iraq. Let's begin with the security sector. You have a massive NATO mission, let's say a significant NATO mission in Iraq. You still have a US mission, and the Iraqi government is still having military and security deals with Russia, all in Baghdad, as well as deals in with other countries. So it's multi-aligned, and it's not being pushed to one or the other.
When you see that the West has still a war mentality approach, how that can be? I mean, you mean that you refer to this in the sense that there is not so much investment in, say, on diplomacy instead, that the regional power have understood better how to deal with it.
Yeah, it's issue by issue. Another example that's often used, the US, under maximum pressure, is trying to get Iran to have zero exports. It's not happening. In fact, in some fuel industries, Iran has increased its exports, such as LPG, after maximum pressure. And the reason for this is not just because Iran has the axis of resistance. Iran has beyond the axis of resistance. Multi-alignment means that Iran can send its fuel and gas towards China or towards other parts of Africa, working with allies and adversaries at the same time. Because on that issue, it's a different landscape. So if you look at the geoeconomics, if you look at the military, if you look at the geopolitics, the rapprochement, the Gulf's relationship with Iraq, with Iran even, it's a new time. Many in the Gulf aren't saying we should contain Iran. In fact, they're supporting engagement now. The point is, because that doubling of conflict has been played out in the Middle East, the powers in the Middle East need to are putting things in their own hands to say, how do we get away from that Cold War, multipolar, bipolar, unipolar world?
Can I ask you...
I didn't answer your question.
A question about the issue that you were mentioning on maximum pressure doesn't work. I mean, we have seen that my question is whether aggressive action and use of offensive force, it's always not working, and we always have to invest into multi-alignment and diplomacy, or there is like something in between. I'm asking you this because there is a view whereby actually Israel has caused so much death and destruction. But actually a new Lebanon may rise again now. So some people may say, well, you know, there has been a lot of destruction, but some dynamics have changed and use of force is legitimate then.
Well, I think what Israel has shown, I mean, in many ways, is force and the complete destruction in Gaza and Palestine, and Lebanon and elsewhere, could still produce results. I think certain technologies and warfare that Israel is using, such as the pager attacks on Hezbollah, show a new side, a future of warfare that's quite scary. It also shows that the international sort of legal system and human rights systems that sort of embarked after World War II are being challenged and contradicted. I do not think a military solution on its own has ever really worked for a political problem, and I think Iraq is case in point.
And with that, we have a few minutes left, but I would like, with your permission, to go back to Victoria, because we have a question from the audience, from Simona Foltin, who says that, you mentioned that Iran has a destabilizing role in the region, and the question is whether, would you agree that Israel has also a destabilizing role? And to that, I would attach maybe another question that relates to what we discussed before and Trump initiative about an Iran nuclear deal, and whether you think the Trump administration has more weight or ways to let or to pressure Israel to accept a nuclear deal.
So I guess I would just say, you know, it's the longstanding U.S. policy that Israel has the right to defend itself, and that, you know, the U.S. will continue to provide support, defense and security support to Israel. There's a longstanding partnership there. In terms of the Iran nuclear deal, you know, clearly the president announced his intention to pursue diplomacy, sitting alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think that shows both the importance of that ongoing discussion with Israel in terms of resolving concerns with Iran's nuclear program and its destabilizing activities, but also the clear intention and message from the president that he wants to give diplomacy a real chance.
Thank you very much for all speaking in this panel. I hope that we brought some clarity about how the world is changing on issue-related alliance rather than poles. I think this was a good point. I think we also very much saw that Iraq is definitely, after 20 years, actually starting to define a very clear foreign policy line, and that there are both a new vision that comes from the Gulf that actually can support regional integration and support also Iraq having its own foreign policy, but also potentially also a new type of EU regional partnership that are ongoing. Thank you again for having us, and let me just ask you to applaud our speakers for their excellent remarks.